step into a place where the map ends and the shadows begin, a domain the old texts called simply the realm of curses, not a place on any atlas, but a pattern threaded through history. Names scratched out of church ledgers, families who vanish overnight, villages that speak in hushed circles about doors that will not stay closed. Tonight, we follow those dark threads, not as scholars behind glass, but as witnesses to the friction where ritual meets reputation, where cult and mythology breathe the same stale air. Listen, every curse begins as a story told badly, a rumor turned to ritual, a wound dressed with words until the wound believes them. Story. A story told at the wrong hour becomes a promise, and promises in cults are more binding than ink. In this realm, a vow is a seed, and seeds root in the darkest soil. Fear, desire, vengeance. Imagine a room lit not by candles, but by the glow of collective certainty, where dozens of voices say the same sentence until the sentence has teeth. It sounds theatrical until it happens. Families whisper of grandmothers who learned a phrase at a funeral and woke to find the well on their land dry and black. Or men who traded their names for luck and paid with sunlight. These are not simple superstitions. They are compacts. They are cults birthing mythology. Now, some of you will think of history books, secret societies with robes and oaths, and you would be right, but misses the more essential truth. Cults and dark mythology feed one another. A cult needs a myth to justify its rights, and a myth needs a cult to keep telling it until it becomes law. The rituals begin small, an offering at a crossroads, a scratched sigil on the inside of a door, a child taught to never whistle after dusk. Then rites grow teeth. They demand more. They ask for tokens, for blood, for the exact phrasing of sorrow until sorrow reshapes the world. And when enough people agree that something curses the land begins to answer, silently, inexorably. We could trace this to names and dates, to a 17th century coven in the mountains, to a coastal clique that bound fishermen with a litany that stole wind. But it's more useful to watch the pattern: exclusion, secrecy, and sacrifice. A cult isolates, then sacralizes. Secrecy makes belief contagious, sacralizing makes it durable. Imagine a town where misfortune is blamed on one family. The family becomes a symbol, weightier than any one person, and symbols attract ritual. Neighbors stop walking past their house at night. Children throw stones there and hatch a chant. The chant becomes a talisman. The talisman becomes a target. That is how curses begin in plain daylight. Social violence wrapped in mythic language, then elevated by ritual until the community forgets it was ever anything else. But there are darker origins too. Pacts forged in desperation, bargains inked in secrecy when famine or war has left people naked on the brink. Bargain. A farmer struggles 3 seasons with blight and hears of a small group who can coax rain for a price. The ritual requires a straw effigy, a midnight procession, a phrase stolen from older gods whose names are now trendy graffiti. The rain comes. The farmer is saved. He pays. Then a neighbor's child falls ill, and the price begins to look like a debt owed not only to men, but to something older and less forgiving. That is the dangerous architecture of cultic exchange. Solutions become obligations, obligations become rules etched into family lore. Which brings us to the codified language these groups use, the incantations that feel like poetry but act like law. Words are not neutral here. In some traditions, the consonants align with names of old spirits. In others, the cadence mimics the rhythm of birth or battle. When a community repeats a phrase, the way a priest recites scripture, they are not simply remembering, they are activating. Activation is the backbone of the realm of curses. But here's a truth that will chill you. Most curses are not supernatural at first. They are psychosocial engines. Fear warps behavior. Behavior warps environment. Neighbors stop helping one another. Crops fail where people stop tending them. A house collapses because no one fixed the roof for fear of awakening the curse. Neglect. Add to that the power of suggestion and confirmation bias. When people expect misfortune, they see misfortune everywhere, and you have a self-propagating storm. Yet somewhere between psychology and the supernatural, the realm of curses gains its true shape. Ritual acts that change intentions into outcomes. Let me tell you of a coastal village. Call it a parable, and yet know this. Fishermen used to return by noon, their nets full. After a small cult began to whisper that the sea had been taken or claimed, fishermen began to go out later, then later still. They altered their routes. They stopped honoring certain nighttime practices that had kept their boats safe for generations. The old protective rites fell away. Storms, which once had passed harmlessly, found easier ways to partish. Was it the curse or the abandonment of old habits? The answer is both. Myth reshapes custom. Custom reshapes outcome. Which is precisely why cults are dangerous. They don't only change you, they alter the environment in which you live.
Environment. While we speak of communities, there are also the singular, deliberate cults. Those who worship a force and harness it. These groups are less about moral cohesion and more about power acquisition. They exist across epochs and names, secret brotherhoods who used sacred geometry to bind a city's luck, priestesses who sold sterility as blessing and then called it a rite, aristocrats who trafficked in ritualized violence to secure heirs. Their myths are political tools dressed as sacred truth, and politics is always hungry. The worst among them do not merely curse their enemies, they design curses like engineering plans, testing, refining, passing secret knowledge down through oaths. Imagine a ritual where the victim is given a gift, a talisman that invisibly marks them as cursed. Imagine a family theater where one child is designated the fault, and the rest of the family is trained to blame them for every misfortune. Over decades, that child and their descendants become a magnet for misfortune. These engineered curses are slow, meticulous work, economic ruin, social ostracization, and finally, myth. But we should not romanticize. Not every cult aims for the grand. Some simply want relief for a hunger, a bone made whole, a child stopped from fading. The line between desperate ritual and malevolent cursing is often finer than we like to admit. And then there are names, proper names, given to certain persistent curses. The black tongue, the hollowing, the quiet fever. Names matter. Name. Naming makes a thing shareable and repeatable. It invites other storytellers to adopt and adapt it. The more a curse is named, the more portable it becomes, able to cross borders with travelers and merchants to lodge in new soils. This is how dark mythology spreads, not through single flashes of evil, but via persistent, mimetic ideas that hitch rides on human suffering and gossip. Yet, for every tale of relentless despair in the realm of curses, there are counter-stories, rituals of unbinding, counter-memories crafted to dissolve a curse's grip. People have always resisted. Communities gather to retell kinder myths. Elders teach children old protective verses that smell of hearth and salt. Someone dares to name a curse as false, and in doing so strips it of power. Because if a curse is held together by belief, belief can be loosened. But loosening belief is hard work. It requires new rituals that replace the old. Public confession instead of secret accusation. Mutual aid instead of shunning. Shared meals instead of solitary vigil. Those sound like small things, but in the realm of curses, small things are weapons of liberation. There is an anecdote I like. A town that had been reduced to superstition by a decades-old curse finally dismantled it when a baker, tired of watching customers avoid one house, walked into that house every morning and left a loaf by the doorstep. Bread, it turned out, was as sacred as any incantation. People noticed. Children asked why. Elders grumbled. The act became a ritual of defiance. The curses stories faltered because the community created a new story, one of daily kindness that could not be explained away by malice. Sometimes, undoing a curse is simply rewriting the narrative that sustains it. Of course, not all curses yield to loaves. Some are stitched into places, in wells, on thresholds, in stones, and require specialists, healers of old, people who can read the geometry of a curse and undo the stitch. These ritual healers are always controversial. Outsiders suspect them of perpetuating other cults. Insiders either adore them or fear them. Their tools are not always mystical. Sometimes they are music, salt, and time. Sometimes they require violence, the careful cutting of a symbol into a tree to let the trapped thing out, or the cracking of a vessel into the river. Ritual is messy. And in the realm of curses, messiness is where truth often hides. Now, as you sit with this, remember that our modern world is not immune. Modern. Online communities mimic the same dynamics. A hashtag turns into a ritualized accusation. A viral story binds people into a sudden cult of outrage. Reputations are cursed by coordinated narratives. The mechanics are eerily familiar. Exclusion, repetition, performative ritual. Only the medium has shifted from moonlit fields to glowing screens. The realm of curses adapts. It migrates. It learns to speak in new tongues. But whether it lives in a mountain hamlet, an aristocrat's private order, or behind the glow of a phone, its anatomy is the same. A myth given ritual form, feeding on fear, sustained by secrecy, and sometimes capable of real harm. So, where do we stand? Between being terrified and being wise. Recognize the patterns. Intervene where you can. Replace secrecy with radical transparency. Replace accusation with repair. And when you encounter a story that insists someone or some place is cursed, ask yourself, who benefits from that story? Who is being excluded? Because curses, more often than not, are social weapons disguised as fate. Now, close your eyes and imagine the realm of curses not as a fantasy, but as a mirror held to our worst human instincts. Our hunger for scapegoats, our appetite for simple answers, our willingness to believe the convenient tale. Then imagine the opposite. People gathering around a ruined house, not to chant doom, but to sweep, to light a candle, to tell another story. That, perhaps, is the most dangerous thing in this realm. Hope, dressed in habit. In the next part of our journey, we will pull back the curtain on specific rites and relics, the signs to watch for, the stories that anchor curses, and the dangerous groups who engineer them. But for now, carry this with you. Myths become curses when they are weaponized. Rituals bind when used to isolate. And the most lasting magic is the kind we make by choosing one another instead of blaming. Keep your eyes open, your questions sharp, and your bread ready.
We pull that curtain back now, quietly, carefully, like a hand lifting a shroud, to look at the rites, the relics, and the rhythms that anchor curses to the world. First, the rites. Not all rituals are grand. Many are practical, almost bureaucratic, and that is what makes them so dangerous. Watch for repetitive actions that demand fidelity. A family that must lock its shutters in a particular order every night. A procession that walks 3 paces clockwise around a well. A prayer that must end with a specific cough. Fidelity. Those tiny, seemingly harmless repetitions are the scaffolding of a curse. They teach bodies to move in a pattern that excludes other behaviors, and exclusion is a hallmark of cultic architecture. There are also performative rites that mark people publicly. A ribbon tied at the collar, a notch on a fence post, a whispered name during the market. Acts meant to humiliate, to brand, to make a person legible to everyone else as other. When you see a small sign repeated by many, ask who benefits from that repetition. The second thing to watch is relics, objects made sacred not by holiness, but by repetition and secrecy. A cracked mirror kept upside down in a cupboard, a rusted coin nailed to a doorframe, an amulet traded in the dark. These are anchors that tie stories to places and people. Relics are portable. They move with pilgrims and merchants and can ferry a curse across miles. Beware objects that are both loved and feared. The family heirloom that no one dares throw away. The carved bone a grandmother keeps under her pillow. The child's toy that nobody will touch after dusk. Those objects function as memory hoarders, and memory is how a curse remembers itself. Next, we must speak of marks and signs, the invisible grammar that cults use to communicate. A ring turned inward on a hand, a stitch undone in a shawl, a chalk cross on a threshold. These are not random. They encode belonging and exclusion, instructions for who to approach and who to ignore. Learn the local lexicon where you travel. The same symbol can mean blessing in one valley and ban in the next. Travelers who ignore small marks often become vectors for curses simply by passing through with ignorance. Now let me give you specifics, real rituals that recur under different names around the world, the way water, earth, and fire are used as currency in the world of curses. Water. There are rites that demand the spilling of water at a threshold to bind a misfortune. Others that bury a small vessel in a field so the crop will succumb or thrive depending on the intent. Soil rituals, too, are common. Burying a written name under a stone so it cannot be spoken aloud, or planting a seed that will never sprout as a symbol of a family's sterility. Fire rituals are dramatic. Torches carried in silence, effigies lit under moonlight, candle flames snuffed in a particular breath to seal an agreement. These elemental acts work because they are sensory. They touch hearing, smell, sight. And sensory experiences are anchor points for human belief. When enough people witness the element used in a certain way, the element begins to carry the meaning forever. You should also watch for inversion rites, ordinary blessings turned backward into curses. A wedding song sung in a slow minor key at a funeral. A harvest prayer recited with one word changed. A blessing reversed to sound like a sentence of banishment. Cults weaponize familiarity. By corrupting a shared ritual, they make the community complicit in the curse's reproduction. The architects of such things, the ritualists who design, test, and institutionalize curses, come in many guises. Some are charismatic leaders who take on saintly faces in daylight and secretive menace by night. Others are technicians of belief, quietly cataloging which syllables provoke panic, which rhythms cause obedience. They study people the way engineers study materials. They know social pressure, shame, and superstition are more reliable than any supernatural force. Yet for all their cleverness, they still rely on human predictability. Grief makes people compliant. Scarcity makes them covetous. Shame makes them silent. We must tell the stories of two such groups, one small, one terrifyingly institutional, to understand the scale. The small group was a clutch of women in a mountain hamlet that called themselves the Keepers of the Quiet Name. They promised fertility to desperate couples for a fee, a lock of hair, an oath at midnight, a small deposit of earth from the hill behind the church. Their rituals were secretive and exacting. Over time, those who paid saw children born, yes, but strangely, the children bore marks. A small white patch of hair, or a narrow scar along the wrist that signaled they were part of a chain. The keepers were not evil by every measure. They were mothers who learned the value of control in a world that offered them little. Yet their system required secrecy. Secrecy required debt. Debt required loyalty. Loyalty required enforcement. The enforcement was subtle at first. Gossip, rumors of bad blood, veiled threats. Then it hardened. Neighbors ostracized, trade withheld, until the keeper's miracle was indistinguishable from a social prison. That is the seed of many cults. Healing that becomes leverage. The second group was institutional. Nobles and clerics who codified curse-making into law, a bureaucracy of damnation. They kept ledgers of families to be diminished, lists that determined who lost land or reputation.
They used ritualized trials to mark people guilty of ancestral offenses and leveraged public ceremonies to normalize exclusion. Their curses were administrative rather than mystical, but no less destructive. Loss of trade rights, denial of marriage, public naming that followed a family for generations. When power becomes ritualized, the difference between magic and policy evaporates. Now, how do you identify a curse in the wild? Look for clusters of harm that disproportionately affect a person or group. Repeated misfortune in a single household across generations, unexplained illnesses localized to a neighborhood, or economic strangulation that aligns suspiciously with some scandalous rumor. Cluster. Pay attention to language. Who is repeatedly called the stain, the hollow, the unclean? Demonizing language precedes exclusion. And look for the social architecture. Are there organized rituals that target the same people? Are objects placed at thresholds? Are children taught not to cross a certain footpath? Those are the fingerprints of a curse. But identification is only the start. Undoing a curse is almost always local work. It requires people to rebuild the social fabric the curse unraveled. First, disrupt the secrecy. Public acknowledgement, a communal meeting, a posted declaration, a recorded oral history that reframes the narrative can begin to strip a curse of its oxygen. Second, reintroduce rituals of repair, shared meals, public repairs of the houses of the blamed, rites that give agency back to the wronged. Third, reclaim objects. Remove relics, cleanse them in visible ways, sometimes by breaking them and burying the pieces in neutral ground. Fourth, create new marks, signs of inclusion, not merely the absence of exclusion, but positive tokens. A bell rung at sunrise for charity, a ribbon ceremony welcoming those who were ostracized back into markets and schools. Ritual healers, the people who can read and unweave the stitches, are invaluable here.
They might be elders with deep local knowledge, or outsiders trained in counter magic, or simply people with courage to act. Often the most effective healers are those who refuse payment, who perform acts of repair as civic duty rather than commerce. But beware, attempts to undo a curse can provoke backlash from those who benefit from it. When you pull at a structural curse, you threaten networks of power. People who profit from exclusion will fight to maintain it. Resist the temptation to idealize the unbinding as purely mystical. Most often, it's political and logistical labor, rebuilding trust, redistributing resources, creating legal protections. That said, there are also precise ritual techniques used across cultures that are worth noting. Public confession ceremonies that force accountability into daylight. Symbolic unbinding, where cords or threads used in the curse are ritually cut and burned. And naming ceremonies that deliberately rename a person or place with a new, positive story. These acts are as much about narrative as they are about gesture. Humans respond to stories and to symbols, and changing both changes behavior. Let me give you a late-night scene. Imagine a ruined chapel where a curse was anchored. Elder women gather with salt and bread. A young teacher reads aloud records showing the false accusations that started the curse. A once shunned man rings a bell and asks forgiveness for his part. They perform small actions, planting a sapling where a stone altar once stood, washing the threshold with river water at dawn, writing a new name above the door. The next morning, people notice children playing on the steps again. A merchant returns her trade to the town. The rumor machine falters because the community has replaced secrecy with daily visible kindness. Restoration is incremental, mundane, and full of groans, but it works. Finally, we must speak of prevention. How does one avoid feeding the realm of curses in the first place? Transparency. Encourage open dialogue about grief and loss so communities don't turn to secret bargains. Create economic safety nets so people don't have to barter with strange rites. Teach children to ask questions about stories that scapegoat others. Build legal and social structures that make it hard for small groups to weaponize ritual. Require public oversight of community rituals that affect property or health. Protect speech while punishing coordinated shaming, and promote cultural literacy so symbols cannot be easily repurposed for harm. Remember that technology is double-edged. Online platforms can amplify harm quickly. They can also be tools for transparency and rapid mobilization to unbind. It comes down to civic habit and everyday courage. Now, as we end this story, picture the realm of curses not as an immutable place, but as a mirror and a test. We are judged not by whether curses exist, they do, but by how we respond when we find them. Respond. Will we perpetuate them through silence and petty cruelty, or will we refuse the spectacle and choose repair, bread, naming, and ritual that binds you to one another instead of rending us apart? The most subversive magic, after all, is simple: to make a place where people are seen, where gossip is checked, where ritual is accountable. If you walk away with one tool, let it be this: whenever you hear a story that pronounces someone cursed, ask who profits from that story. Then do the tedious, public, daily work to show another truth. Sweep the steps, bring bread, name the lie out loud, invite the children to play there. These are not glamorous acts. They do not make for viral clips. They are the slow alchemy of repair. But in the quiet tally of years, they are most effective. So, keep your eyes open. Keep your questions sharp. Keep your hands ready to do the small, stubborn tasks of undoing harm. The realm of curses will always exist in some form, because humans will always be human, but its power is never absolute when people choose to act. And with this incantation of defiance, not a spell to curse, but a ritual to heal. Speak plainly, name the wrong, repair the harm, share bread,
and refuse secrecy. Do these things again and again and watch how a curse unravels. It is tedious, human, and entirely possible. And when the night feels heavy, remember that hope is also contagious. It spreads by small, visible acts. Thank you for walking these shadowed paths with me. Keep your lanterns lit, and when you find a place that needs mending, go, quietly, with salt and bread, and stay until the work is done. Good night.